They were the golden couple. Successful doctors, devoted parents, a picture-perfect family enjoying a dream holiday in paradise. But what if the face of the most famous missing person case in history isn't the face of a victim, but the face of a cover-up? We have all heard the official story. A criminal in the night, a window forced open, a child vanished into thin air. But what if the window was never forced? What if the criminal is just a ghost story invented to hide a devastating accident? And what happens when a mother walks into a room, discovers the unthinkable, and makes the terrifying choice to protect the person responsible? Tonight, we are not just retelling a tragedy. We are dissecting a deception. We are looking at the timeline that doesn't add up, the scent that the cadaver dogs found, and the silence that is held for 16 years. We are asking the question everyone is afraid to whisper. Did they really search for their daughter, or were they just waiting for us to stop looking? Before we step into apartment 5A and uncover the secrets hidden in the shadows, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these forgotten truths into the light. Now, let's go back to the night where the perfect lie began. The exhaustion was not merely physical. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that Kate wore around her shoulders, a weight that had been accumulating for months, perhaps years. She stood in the center of the living area of apartment 5A, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric of her dress. The air in the room felt stagnant, recycled, holding the faint, sour scent of spilled milk and anxiety. She looked at Jerry, who was pacing the short distance between the kitchenette and the patio doors, his movements sharp, precise, and agitated. He checked his watch, a reflex he performed with the regularity of a ticking metronome. "We are going to be late," Jerry said, his voice tight. It was a statement of fact, but to Kate, it sounded like an accusation. He did not look at her when he spoke. His eyes were fixed on the sliding glass doors that led to the small terrace and the street beyond. He tested the handle again, sliding the door back and forth on its track, the metal ground against metal, a harsh, grating sound that made Kate wince. "They are finally asleep," Kate whispered, casting a nervous glance toward the bedroom door that stood slightly ajar. She needed him to lower his voice. The battle to get the young children to settle down in a strange environment had left her drained, her patience frayed to a thin, snapping thread. The twins had been difficult, feeding off the restless energy of the travel, but it was their eldest daughter who had been the most resistant, her blue-green eyes wide with a mix of excitement and unease. Jerry stopped pacing and turned to face his wife. His expression was unreadable, a mask of professional detachment that he often wore when dealing with difficult patients, or in this case, a tired spouse. "We need this, Kate. We need to be down there with the others. We cannot be the couple that hides in their room every night. It sends the wrong message." Kate wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the chill of the air conditioning. "The wrong message to whom, Jerry? To the others? Do you think they care if we are 10 minutes late? They are probably on their second bottle of wine by now. They are not counting the minutes. They are counting." Jerry corrected her, his tone clipped. "Everything is a tally with them. Who is coping better? Whose children are better behaved? Who has the more prestigious fellowship? You know how it works. We are here to relax, yes, but we are also here to maintain our standing. This group does not tolerate weakness well." He was right, and that was what she hated most. The vacation, which had been sold to her as a reprieve from the crushing demands of their medical careers and the chaos of domestic life, felt more like a performance review. The 7 friends they had traveled with, the group the staff had dubbed the Tapas, 7, were successful, driven, and intensely competitive, even in their leisure. There was no room for messy breakdowns or parental incompetence. Kate walked to the table and picked up her glass of white wine, taking a large swallow. It was warm, but she did not care. She needed a moment of liquid fortitude to face the evening. She looked at the patio doors again. Jerry had left them unlocked. It was the only way they could re-enter the apartment from the outside without walking all the way around to the front door, which would require a key they did not want to carry, or worse, navigating the main entrance, which might wake the children. "Are we really doing this again?" Kate asked, gesturing toward the unlocked slider. "Leaving it open like that? Anyone could walk in off the street." Jerry scoffed, dismissing her fears with a wave of his hand. "We have been over this, Kate. It is safe. This is a family resort, not inner-city Leicester. Besides, the checks are frequent. We are practically sitting in the garden. If we lock it, we have to go the long way around every 20 minutes. The noise of the front door is what wakes them up. Do you want to spend another hour settling the twins because the latch clicked too loudly?" Kate bit her lip. The logic was sound, pragmatically speaking, but it sat uncomfortably in her stomach. The convenience of the back door was undeniable. It turned a 3-minute walk into a 30-second dash. But the vulnerability of it, the glass, the lack of a deadbolt, the direct access to the public road gnawed at her. "I suppose," she murmured, conceding the argument because she did not have the energy to fight it. She just wanted to sit down, drink wine, and pretend for a few hours that she was just a woman, not a doctor, not a mother, just Kate. "Then let us go," Jerry said, moving toward the exit. He did not wait for her. He stepped out onto the terrace, the darkness swallowing him. Kate took one last look at the room. She walked softly to the children's bedroom door and peered in. The breathing was rhythmic, a soft chorus of sleep. Her eldest lay curled on her side, clutching her favorite soft toy. The peace in the room was absolute, a sharp contrast to the turmoil in Kate's mind. She pulled the door until it was almost shut, leaving it open just a crack to allow air to circulate, and turned away. She followed her husband out into the night, sliding the glass door shut behind her, but leaving the mechanism unengaged. It was a simple action, a muscle memory formed over the last few days. Slide. Do not lock. Walk away. As they walked toward the restaurant, the sound of laughter drifted toward them. The group was already in high spirits. Kate pasted a smile on her face, a reflex as practiced as checking a pulse. She linked her arm through Jerry's, feeling the tension in his bicep. They were a team. They presented a united front. They were the golden couple, the successful doctors with the beautiful family. Nothing could be allowed to crack that veneer. When they arrived at the table, the greeting was raucous. Chairs were pulled out, wine was poured, and questions were fired like arrows. "Finally," David shouted, raising his glass. "We thought the monsters had won tonight. Is everything under control at the frantic household?" "Under control," Jerry said smoothly, slipping into his seat and taking the menu. "Just a minor negotiation over the bedtime story. You know how she gets." The table laughed. Kate forced a chuckle, sitting down and accepting the glass that was thrust into her hand. She looked around the table at the faces of their friends. They were flushed with sun and alcohol, their eyes bright, their conversation already looping into the familiar territories of work, politics, and mutual acquaintances. "I checked on yours," Matthew said to Jerry, leaning across the table. "When I went back for the listening service check, all quiet on the Western Front." "Thanks, mate," Jerry nodded, unfolding his napkin. "I will go back in half an hour. We are on a rotation tonight." The system. That was what they called it. The checking system. It sounded official, responsible, almost medical in its precision. They had rejected the resort's listening service, the babysitters, and the creche for the evening. Instead, they had devised this relay race of parental supervision. One adult would leave the dinner table every 20 or 30 minutes, walk back to the apartments, listen at the doors, or peer into the rooms, and then return to tag the next person. It allowed them to feel like responsible parents, while still enjoying the freedom of a child-free evening. It was a compromise, a calculated risk. Kate took a long sip of her wine, the liquid burning her throat. She told herself it was fine. Everyone was doing it. They were only 100 yards away. What could possibly go wrong in 20 minutes? The conversation swirled around her, a blur of voices. Kate felt disconnected, her mind still back in apartment 5A. She imagined the silence of the room, the rise and fall of small chests. She felt a sudden, irrational urge to run back, to lock the door, to sit in the dark at the foot of the bed and wait for morning. But she stayed. She smiled. She nodded at the appropriate times. She was trapped in the gilded cage of social expectation, anchored by the fear of appearing neurotic. "So, Jerry," Fiona asked, her voice cutting through Kate's reverie, "how is the new fellowship coming along? Are you going to publish that paper before the end of the year?" Jerry brightened, the tension in his shoulders easing as the topic shifted to his career. He leaned back, confident, in his element. "It is going well. The data is promising. I think we are looking at a breakthrough in the imaging protocols." Kate watched him. He was brilliant, charismatic, and driven. He was everything she had fallen in love with. But tonight, there was a hardness in his eyes that frightened her. He was so focused on the future, on the next achievement, on the perception of success. She wondered if he ever felt the same crushing dread that she did, the fear that it was all a house of cards waiting to collapse. She reached for the bottle of wine and refilled her glass to the brim. The night was young. The rotation had begun. The clock was ticking, marking the intervals of their neglect, counting down to a moment that would shatter their carefully constructed world into a million irreparable pieces. The days at the resort had developed a seductive rhythm, a repetitive cycle that lulled the mind into a state of complacency. It was a schedule dictated not by the sun, but by the opening and closing times of the various clubs and restaurants. Tuesday had bled into Wednesday, and now it was Thursday, the 3rd of May. The routine was absolute. Morning milk, breakfast, the drop-off at the kids' club, tennis lessons for the adults, lunch, pool time, high tea for the children, and then the long, stretching transition into the evening. Kate moved through the afternoon of that Thursday with a sense of heaviness she could not shake. She sat on the edge of the pool, watching Jerry in the water with their eldest daughter. He was holding her up, helping her float, his face wet and smiling. It was a perfect picture of father and child, bonding in the sunshine. But Kate noticed things that others might have missed. She saw the way Jerry checked his watch even while in the water. She saw the way he scanned the poolside area, noting who was watching them, ensuring that their family tableau was being observed. "I am tired, Mommy," the little girl said as she clambered out of the pool, shivering despite the warmth of the day. She wrapped a towel around her small frame, her lips slightly blue. "I want to go upstairs." "It is only 2:30, darling," Kate said, brushing wet hair from her daughter's forehead. "Do you not want to play with the others?" "No," the girl insisted, leaning her weight against Kate's leg. The little girl said she wanted to go back to the room to rest and play with her favorite toy. Kate looked at Jerry, who was climbing out of the pool, water streaming from his shoulders. "She is tired," Kate said. "I'm going to take them up." Jerry nodded, grabbing his own towel. "Fine. I have a tennis match with David in 20 minutes anyway. I will meet you back at the apartment at 5 to change." The separation of duties was swift and unspoken. Kate gathered the children, heralding the twins into the stroller, while the eldest walked beside her, dragging her feet. The walk back to apartment 5 felt longer than usual. The concrete path radiated heat. The apartment, when they entered, was cool and dim. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of domestic maintenance. Baths were run. Clothes were selected. The mundane tasks of motherhood did not stop just because they were on holiday. They merely changed location. By 6 o'clock, the children were fed. By 7, the wind-down had begun. This was the critical hour. The transition from day to night, the shifting of gears from parents to adults. Kate felt the pressure mounting as the clock ticked towards 7:30. The reservation was at 8:30. They had an hour to bathe, dress, brush teeth, read stories, and extinguish the lights. It was a military operation executed in pajamas. Jerry returned from his tennis match flushed and energized. He showered quickly, leaving the bathroom door open, shouting updates about the game over the noise of the water. He had won, of course. He was in a good mood. "Are they down yet?" he asked as he emerged, wrapping a towel around his waist. "Just about," Kate called from the children's bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the single bed, reading a book about a tiger. Her voice was soft, hypnotic, designed to induce sleep. The twins were already silent in their travel cots, thumb-sucking and heavy-eyed. The eldest lay back against the pillow, her eyes fighting to stay open. "Read it again," she whispered. "Not tonight, darling," Kate said, closing the book firmly. "It is sleep time. Mommy and Daddy are going to have dinner now." The little girl frowned. "Are you leaving?" "We are just nearby," Kate reassured her, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Just at the restaurant where we have breakfast. We will come and check on you all the time. You will not even know we are gone." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. "You will not even know we are gone." It was a promise based on the hope that the child would remain unconscious. If she woke, she would certainly know. She would wake to a dark room, an empty apartment, and the silence of abandonment. Kate stood up and moved to the door. "Good night, my loves. Sleep tight." She pulled the door until it was almost closed, replicating the precise angle from the night before. Jerry was already dressed, pouring 2 glasses of wine in the living area. He looked handsome in his casual evening wear, the picture of a relaxed vacationer. "One for the road," he offered, holding out a glass. Kate took it, downing half of it in one go. She needed to numb the sharp edges of her maternal guilt. The checking system. It was the topic of conversation that had dominated their lunch earlier that day. Some of the other parents in the resort used the drop-off creche, where staff sat in the corridor. Others used baby monitors. The Tapa 7 had decided that monitors would not work over the distance and that the creche was too impersonal. They preferred the physical check. "It is better this way," Jerry said, noticing her hesitation as she looked toward the children's room. "We have eyes on them. We are in control." Control. That was Jerry's favorite word. He believed he could control outcomes through rigorous planning and adherence to protocol. He believed that if they followed the schedule check every 20 minutes, enter through the patio, listen, leave, then safety was guaranteed. He did not account for chaos. He did not account for variables he could not see. Kate went to the bathroom to finish getting ready. She applied makeup mechanically, staring at her reflection. She looked tired. Her eyes were shadowed. She wondered if the other wives felt this exhaustion, or if they were better at hiding it. She applied a layer of lipstick, masking the pale tension of her mouth. "Ready?" Jerry called from the door. "Coming," Kate replied. She walked out into the living area. The apartment was silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Jerry was standing by the patio doors, his hand on the latch. "Unlocked?" Kate asked, her voice low. "Unlocked," Jerry confirmed. "The key is on the table. We do not need it." He slid the door open. The evening air rushed in, cooler now. The smell of the ocean was faint but present. Kate stepped out, and Jerry followed, sliding the door shut behind them. It clicked into place. But the lock remained disengaged. A simple push from the outside would open it. They walked the familiar route. The pavement was uneven. The streetlights flickered. They passed the tennis courts, the swimming pool, the reception area. The distance was physical, measured in steps, but the emotional distance was expanding with every meter they put between themselves and the sleeping children. When they arrived at the Tapas restaurant, the table was already filling up. The noise level was high. Bottles of red wine were being uncorked. The mood was boisterous. "Here come the stragglers," Russell shouted. We were about to send a search party. "Very funny," Jerry said, taking his seat. "We had a bit of a situation with the milk, but it is sorted." Kate sat down, her back to the darkness of the gardens. She could not see the apartment from here. A wall and a heavy tarp blocked the view. That was the flaw in the plan. They claimed they were close, but they were blind. To see the apartment, they had to physically leave the table and walk the path. The food was ordered. The conversation flowed. Kate tried to eat, but her appetite was gone. She pushed salad around her plate. She watched the clock on the wall. 8:50. 9 o'clock. "I will go first," Jerry said, standing up at 9:05. "It is my turn on the roster." He looked calm. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and placed it on the table. "I will be back in 5 minutes. Order me another glass of red." Kate watched him walk away. He moved with a confident stride, disappearing into the shadows of the pathway. She felt a tightening in her chest. She wanted to call him back, to tell him to lock the door, to bring the children here, to stop this dangerous game of roulette they were playing with fate. But she stayed silent. She took a sip of wine. She waited. The minutes ticked by. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The conversation at the table turned to tennis scores and local politics. Kate nodded, but her ears were straining for the sound of Jerry's footsteps returning. He was taking longer than usual. Perhaps one of them had stirred. Perhaps the eldest needed water. Kate's mind began to race, inventing scenarios. She imagined him standing in the dark room, soothing a crying child. She imagined him struggling with the patio door. At 9:15, Jerry reappeared. He walked back to the table, his face composed, his demeanor unchanged. He sat down and reached for his wine glass. "All good?" Matthew asked. Jerry nodded. He took a long drink before answering. "Fast asleep." Didn't hear a peep. He looked at Kate then. For a second, their eyes locked. There was something in his gaze that she could not decipher. It was not the usual reassurance. It was something flatter, darker, like a shutter had come down behind his eyes. "Your turn next, Matt," Jerry said, pointing his fork at his friend. 9:30. "Right," Matthew said. "I will check on ours and listen at yours." The rhythm resumed. The eating, the drinking, the laughing, but Kate felt a cold draft on her neck. She looked at Jerry again. He was cutting his steak, his hand steady, his movements precise, but he was eating too fast. He was drinking too fast, and under the table, his leg was bouncing, a frantic, rhythmic tapping that vibrated through the floor and into the soles of her feet. Something was wrong. The air around the table had shifted, though no one else seemed to notice. The laughter sounded shrill. The shadows seemed to stretch longer. The routine had been executed. The check had been performed. But the silence that Jerry had brought back with him felt heavy, loaded with a secret that was waiting to detonate. Kate gripped the stem of her glass until her knuckles turned white. The night had only just begun, but the rhythm of neglect had already set the tempo for a tragedy that was unfolding 180 feet away in the dark. Jerry walked away from the light of the restaurant and into the shadows of the pathway. The transition was abrupt, his eyes adjusting from the warm, candlelit glow of the dinner table to the muted gray of the resort grounds. The air was still, devoid of the earlier breeze, and the silence pressed against his ears. He checked his watch again. 9:05. He was on schedule. The precision of the timing gave him a fleeting sense of comfort, a tether to the orderly world he preferred. He reached the ground floor apartment, 5A. The patio doors stood exactly as he had left them, a dark rectangle of glass reflecting the faint ambient light of the street. He placed his hand on the metal frame and slid it open. The mechanism moved smoothly, a silent invitation. He stepped inside, the soles of his deck shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. The living area was submerged in darkness. save for the sliver of light bleeding in from the street lamps outside. The air inside was cooler than the terrace, holding a stillness that felt heavy. Jerry moved with the efficiency of a man on rounds. He did not need to turn on the lights. He knew the layout intimately. He crossed the living room, his eyes scanning the vague shapes of the furniture, the sofa, the dining table, the discarded toys. He reached the door to the children's bedroom. It was ajar, just as Kate had left it. He pushed it open a few inches further, allowing enough light to penetrate the room so he could verify the 3 sleeping forms. He looked at the travel cots first. The twins were there, soft lumps under their blankets, their breathing rhythmic and shallow, safe. He turned his gaze to the single bed against the wall. He expected to see the familiar curve of his daughter's back, the pink of her pajamas, the soft toy tucked under her arm. The bed was empty. For a second, his brain did not process the visual data. It was a glitch, an error in perception. He blinked, stepping closer, squinting into the gloom. The duvet was pulled back. The pillow was depressed. But the child was not there. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his chest. He spun around, scanning the small room. She must have woken up. She must have climbed out of bed. "Maddie?" he whispered, his voice cracking. There was no answer. The silence in the room was absolute, amplified by the sound of his own heart hammering against his ribs. He dropped to his knees, looking under the bed. Nothing. He checked the wardrobe. Empty. He moved back into the living area, his movements becoming frantic, jerky. Had she wandered out? Had she gone looking for them? The patio door was unlocked. The thought seized him. She could be wandering the streets. Lost. Crying. He turned toward the main door of the apartment, intending to run out and search the perimeter. As he passed the sofa, his foot caught on something soft. He stumbled, catching himself on the armrest. He looked down. She was there. She was lying behind the sofa, in the narrow gap between the furniture and the wall. It was a strange, unnatural position. Her limbs tangled, her head resting at an angle that sent a jolt of nausea through his entire body. Jerry fell to his knees beside her. The doctor in him overrode the father for a single, terrifying second. His hands moved automatically, checking for a pulse at the carotid artery, lifting an eyelid, feeling for the warmth of breath. His fingers pressed against her skin, searching for a sign of life, but found none. The silence was absolute. The pupils were fixed. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." He pulled her out from behind the sofa, cradle lifting her onto the rug. He began CPR, his movements desperate, forceful. He counted the compressions in his head, 1, 2, 3, 4. He breathed into her mouth. He pressed again. He was a consultant cardiologist. He knew the mechanics of life and death better than anyone. He knew the feeling of a heart restarting, the surge of hope, but there was nothing. She was gone. The injury was visible now, a sign of the tragic fall, perhaps climbing on the back of the sofa to look out the window, perhaps slipping in the dark, a tragic, freak accident. He stopped. He sat back on his heels, his hands hovering over her small, still body. The silence of the room crashed down on him, deafening in its intensity. She was dead. And then, the second wave of realization hit him, more destructive than the first. He looked around the room. The unlocked door, the empty wine glasses on the table, the parents dining 180 feet away. Neglect. The word blazed in his mind like a neon sign. They would say it was neglect. They would say he and Kate were responsible. They had left them alone. They had been drinking. A child had died on their watch, in a preventable accident, while they laughed with friends down the road. He could see the headlines. He could see the police investigation. He could see the end of his career, the revocation of his medical license, the loss of the other 2 children. Social services would take the twins. They would be destroyed. Everything they had, built the reputation, the practice, the life would be incinerated by this one moment of failure. He looked at his watch. 9:10. He had been gone 5 minutes. He could not call the police. If he called the police now, the narrative was set. Doctor leaves child unattended. Child dies. There was no defense. A cold, terrifying logic began to crystallize in his mind. It was the logic of triage, of damage control. He could not save her. She was already gone, but he could save the rest of them. He could save Kate. He could save the twins. He had to hide her. He stood up, his legs shaking violently. He grabbed a towel from the drying rack, his hands moving with a dissociation that frightened him. He wrapped the bundle carefully, shielding the child from view, shielding himself from the reality. He had to put her somewhere safe, somewhere temporary, until he could think, until he could figure out how to move her permanently. He scanned the room, the wardrobe in the main bedroom. It was high up on the shelf, behind the extra blankets. It was dark. It was cool. He moved quickly, carrying the bundle. He placed her on the shelf, pushing her to the back, piling the spare bedding in front of her. He closed the wardrobe door. He stood in the center of the bedroom, breathing hard. He checked his clothes. No blood. He checked his face in the mirror. He looked pale, shocking, but composed. He ran a hand through his hair. He had to go back. He had to finish the dinner. He had to create the timeline. He walked back to the living room. He checked the floor behind the sofa. He straightened the rug. He made sure the scene looked undisturbed. He stepped out through the patio doors. He slid the glass shut. He stood on the terrace for 10 seconds, inhaling the night air, forcing his heart rate to slow, forcing the bile down his throat. He was not Jerry McCann, the father of a dead child. He was Jerry McCann, the vacationing doctor who had just checked on his sleeping kids. He began the walk back to the restaurant. Every step was a lie. Every breath was a deception. He fixed his face into a mask of casual indifference. He practiced the line in his head. They are fine, fast asleep. He emerged into the light of the dining area. He saw the faces of his friends. He saw Kate. She looked up at him, her eyes questioning. He sat down. He picked up his wine glass. He looked her in the eye and delivered the performance of his life. Fast asleep, he said. Not a peep. The wine in Jerry's glass was a deep, blood-red Merlot. He stared at it, watching the liquid tremble slightly with the vibrations of his hand. He placed the glass down on the table, gripping the stem to steady himself. The noise of the restaurant was a physical assault. The clinking of cutlery, the burst of laughter from the next table, the background hum of music, it all scraped against his raw nerves. He felt hollowed out, as if his internal organs had been scooped away, leaving only a brittle shell. A few hundred yards away, in a dark wardrobe, his daughter lay wrapped in a towel. The reality of it kept trying to punch through his composure, but he held it back with a mental wall of iron will. He had to survive the next hour. If he could survive the next hour, he could figure out the next step. So, Jerry, David was saying, leaning back in his chair, oblivious to the catastrophe sitting opposite him, regarding that hospital trust issue. Did you ever get a resolution on the budget allocation? Jerry forced his brain to engage. He accessed the part of his mind that dealt with hospital administration, a dry, dusty archive of facts that felt utterly meaningless now. Yes, he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, detached and robotic. We managed to secure the funding for the new cardiac unit. It was a fight, but we got there. Good man, David nodded, impressed. Always the negotiator. Kate was looking at him. She was frowning slightly. She knew him better than anyone. She could sense the shift in his frequency. Are you okay? She mouthed across the table, under the noise of the conversation. Jerry nodded, offering a tight, strained smile. Fine, he mouthed back. Just a headache. He checked his watch. 9:25. The time was moving with agonizing slowness. Every minute that ticked by was a minute where the body lay undiscovered, where the alibi solidified. But it was also a minute closer to the inevitable discovery. Kate was due to check at 10. He could not let her find her. Not like that. Not in the wardrobe. If Kate found her, she would scream. She would collapse. The police would be called. The accident would be revealed. The negligence would be exposed. He had to move her. He had to get her out of the apartment and into a place where she would never be connected to the apartment, where the narrative of abduction could be plausible. But how? He was trapped here, anchored by the social obligation of the dinner. "I will go check on ours," Matthew Oldfield announced, pushing his chair back. It was 9:30. Jerry felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it made his vision blur. Matthew was going. Matthew, who was helpful, obliging, and thorough. "I will listen at yours, too, Jerry," Matthew offered, standing up. "Save you the trip for a bit." Jerry's mouth went dry. He could not say no. To refuse a kind offer would be suspicious. But if Matthew went into the apartment, if he turned on the light, if he checked the wardrobe— "Thanks, Matt," Jerry managed to say. The words felt like jagged glass in his throat. "Just listen at the door. If they are quiet, do not go in. The door squeaks. It wakes them up." "Right," Matthew said. "Listening only." "Got it." Jerry watched him walk away. The back of Matthew's shirt disappeared into the darkness. Jerry sat frozen. He could not breathe. He was counting the seconds. It took 3 minutes to walk there, 2 minutes to check, 3 minutes to walk back, 8 minutes. He had 8 minutes of pure, unadulterated terror. He imagined Matthew walking up to the patio, sliding the door, stepping in. Maybe he would hear something, the settling of the building, a rustle. Maybe he would smell something. No, it was too soon for that. But what if he saw the slightly displaced rug? What if he saw the towel missing from the rack? Jerry picked up his wine glass and drained it. He poured another. He needed to quell the rising panic. "Relax," Fiona said to him, misinterpreting his tension. "Matt is good with the kids. He won't wake them." "I know," Jerry said. "I know." He stared at the black void beyond the restaurant terrace. In his mind, he was with Matthew. He was walking the path. He was standing at the door. "Please do not go in." He prayed silently to a God he had abandoned an hour ago. "Please do not turn on the light." 5 minutes passed. 6. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. Matthew was walking back. He looked relaxed. He was strolling, hands in his pockets. He sat down at the table, picking up his fork. "All quiet?" Jane asked. "Silent as the grave," Matthew said casually, slicing into his steak. "I listened at 5 a. Absolute silence. I didn't even go in. The door was open a crack, enough to hear breathing. They are out cold." Jerry exhaled. It was a long, shuddering release of breath that he disguised as a cough. He had survived the check. The secret was safe, but the relief was short-lived. The clock was now his enemy. 9:40. Kate was next. Kate would go at 10, and Kate would not just listen. Kate would go in. She would check the covers. She would touch their faces. She would see the empty bed. And if the bed was empty, she would search. She would open the wardrobe. He had 20 minutes. He had to move the body. Now, he could not do it later. He could not wait for the chaos. If the police arrived and searched the apartment, they would find her in the wardrobe. That was concealment. That was guilt. That was murder charges. He had to get her out. "I need the bathroom," Jerry said, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the patio stones. Kate looked up, surprised. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I think the wine has gone to my head," Jerry said. "I just need a splash of water." He walked toward the restaurant toilets, but he did not go in. He bypassed them, slipping out the side exit that led toward the back of the resort complex. He moved into the shadows, his heart racing. He broke into a run. He ran not on the path, but on the grass, keeping to the darkest areas, away from the pool lights. He reached the apartment in record time. He slid the door open. He was inside. He did not hesitate. He went straight to the wardrobe. He pulled the bundle out. It was heavier than he remembered. He had no plan for where to put her. He just knew she could not be here. He needed a place that was dark, hidden, and distant. He stepped out onto the street. He looked left. He looked right. The street was empty. He began to walk. He walked fast, clutching the bundle to his chest. He felt like a ghost, a shadow moving through a nightmare. He headed toward the beach area, toward the dark, unlit roads where the construction works were. At the intersection, he saw headlights. He froze, pressing himself into a hedge. A car passed. He kept moving. His mind was blank, focused only on the physical act of putting one foot in front of the other. He was not a father carrying a child. He was a courier. He was a mechanism of disposal. He found a spot. Temporary. It had to be temporary. He could not leave her exposed, but he had no time. He left the bundle in the shadows, a secret hidden by the night. "I will come back," he whispered. "I will come back." He turned and ran. He ran back to the apartment. He checked his watch. 9:55. He slipped back inside. He checked the room. The wardrobe was empty. The bed was empty. The stage was set. He exited the apartment. He did not go back to the restaurant. He waited in the shadows near the path, composing himself, catching his breath, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He walked back into the restaurant at 9:58. He sat down. "Better?" Kate asked. "Much better," Jerry lied. "Your turn, Kate," Fiona said, looking at her watch. 10 o'clock. Kate stood up. "I will just go and check. I won't be long." Jerry watched her go. He watched his wife walk into the trap he had set. He watched her walk toward the moment that would destroy her life. He wanted to scream. He wanted to stop her. But he sat still, his hand gripping the tablecloth. The silent handoff was complete. He had moved the burden of discovery from himself to her. He had created the mystery. Now, he just had to live. The walk from the restaurant to the apartment was a journey measured in heartbeats, each one echoing loudly in Kate's ears. She moved quickly, her sandals slapping against the pavement, but her mind was already ahead of her, projecting images of sleeping children into the darkness. It was 10 o'clock. The air had cooled significantly, and a slight breeze rustled the unseen vegetation, a whisper that sounded like a warning. She reached the patio doors of apartment 5A. They were closed. She placed her hand on the handle, expecting the resistance of a lock, but remembering they had left it undone. The metal was cold under her palm. She slid the door open, the friction of the runners creating a low, grinding vibration that traveled up her arm. Kate stepped inside. The silence that greeted her was not the peaceful, heavy silence of slumbering children. It was a hollow, gaping silence, the kind that exists in a room that has been vacated. She paused in the living area, her senses straining. Usually, she could hear the rhythmic breathing of the twins, the occasional shifting of a body in bed. Tonight, there was only the hum of the refrigerator. She walked to the bedroom door. It was open much wider than she had left it. A draft hit her face. It was strong, gusting through the room, causing the door to shudder against its frame. That was wrong. The window had been closed. She was certain of it. The shutters were down. Kate stepped into the bedroom. The draft was coming from the window. The curtains were blowing inward, ghostly shapes in the gloom. She reached for the light switch, her fingers trembling. The light flooded the room, harsh and sudden. Kate blinked, her eyes adjusting to the brightness. She looked at the travel cots. The twins were there, curled up, oblivious to the light. She looked at the single bed. It was empty. The duvet was pulled back, exposing the white sheet. The pillow was indented, but the space where her daughter should have been was vacant. The soft toy, the cat, was lying on the pillow, staring up at the ceiling. "Maddie?" Kate said. Her voice was a small, fragile thing. She dropped to her knees, looking under the bed. Dust bunnies, a stray hair tie. Nothing else. She stood up, spinning around. She checked the wardrobe. She threw the doors open, pushing aside the hanging clothes. Empty. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. It started in her stomach and surged upward, constricting her throat. She ran into the parents' bedroom. Empty. The bathroom. Empty. She ran back to the children's room. She went to the window. The shutters were raised. The window was slid open. But how? She stood frozen, her mind trying to process the impossible physics of the scene. The shutters were heavy. They could only be opened from the inside with the strap, or forced from the outside with considerable noise. And the window. She looked at the bed again. The cuddle cat. It was placed so neatly, too neatly. If a child had been snatched, if there had been a struggle, would the toy be sitting there like an observer? And the door. The front door. She ran to it. It was locked. She ran back to the patio doors. She stepped out onto the terrace. "Maddie!" she screamed, but the sound caught in her throat, coming out as a strangled gasp. She had to get Jerry. Jerry would know what to do. Jerry had checked them. Jerry had said they were fine. Jerry. A terrifying thought crystallized in her mind, sharp and jagged. Jerry had been here 40 minutes ago. He had said everything was silent. He had said he didn't even go in fully because he didn't want to wake them. But if the window was open, if the shutters were up, surely he would have felt the draft. Surely he would have heard the curtains snapping in the wind. The draft was strong enough to slam the door. How could he have stood there, listened, and missed a gale blowing through the room? Unless the window wasn't open then. Unless he opened it. The thought was so grotesque, so treasonous, that she tried to push it away, but it clung to her. She began to run back to the restaurant. Her legs felt heavy, as if she were running through water. She reached the perimeter of the dining area. She could see them. The table was bathed in the warm glow of the candles. They were laughing. Jerry was holding his wine glass, his head thrown back slightly as he listened to a joke. He looked so normal. He looked so composed. Kate stopped at the edge of the light. She stared at him. And in that second, Jerry turned. He sensed her presence. His head snapped around, and his eyes locked onto hers. The laughter at the table died down as the others noticed Kate's expression. Jerry's face changed. It didn't crumble into confusion. It didn't show the perplexed concern of a husband seeing his distressed wife. It hardened. His eyes narrowed, intense, and communicating a frantic, urgent message. He stood up. He did not ask, "What is wrong?" He did not ask, "Are they okay?" He walked toward her, moving fast. He reached her before she could enter the circle of the table. He held her arms firmly, his grip conveying his desperation. "She is gone," Kate whispered. The words felt like they were ripping her throat apart. Jerry did not gasp. He did not scream. He leaned in close, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled of red wine. "The window," he hissed. His voice was a low, desperate command. The window was open. The shutters were broken. Someone took her. Kate stared at him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He wasn't asking. He was telling. He was scripting the reality. "Jerry," she choked out. "The window. You checked. The window was forced. Jerry interrupted her, his eyes intense, communicating a frantic plea. Someone came in. Someone took her. We were watching. We checked. But someone took her. Do you understand, Kate? Someone took her. She looked at his face. She saw the terror there. It wasn't the terror of loss. It was the terror of exposure. She saw the calculation. She saw the trap. If she said no, you checked, you missed it. She destroyed him. She destroyed the father of her twins. She destroyed the life they had built. She would be the wife of the monster. But if she agreed, the seconds stretched into eternity. The choice hung between them, suspended in the night air. Truth or survival. Justice or family. Kate felt something inside her break. It was a clean, sharp fracture. The part of her that was a doctor, a scientist, a seeker of truth, died in that moment. The mother who needed to protect what was left took over. She nodded. It was a tiny, imperceptible movement. Jerry released her arms. He stepped back. He threw his hands up, his face transforming into a mask of anguish. "Oh God," he shouted, his voice ringing out across the quiet resort. "Oh God, Kate." Kate took a breath. She drew it from the bottom of her lungs, pulling in the cool night air, the scent of the ocean, the scent of the lie. She turned toward the table, toward their friends who were half rising from their chairs, their faces masks of confusion. She opened her mouth. She let the scream come. It was a scream of genuine agony, of genuine loss, but it was wrapped in the fiction they had just signed in blood. "They have taken her!" she screamed. "They have taken her!" The scream shattered the tranquility of the Ocean Club. It was a raw, visceral sound that cut through the murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. At the tapas table, chairs scraped violently against the stone patio as the 7 friends scrambled to their feet. "What?" Fiona cried out, dropping her napkin. "What did you say?" Kate stood at the edge of the terrace, her body shaking so violently that she looked as if she were having a seizure. Jerry was beside her, his arm around her shoulders, holding her up. His face was buried in his hands, but he was nodding, confirming the nightmare. "Gone," Kate wailed. "She is gone. The window is open." The group mobilized with chaotic urgency. Matthew Oldfield was the first to move, sprinting past them toward apartment 5A. The others followed, a stampede of panic in flip-flops and deck shoes. Jerry and Kate ran with them. Kate felt like she was floating outside her body, watching a woman in a floral dress run toward a crime scene she had helped create. She watched herself crying, watched herself stumbling. It was a performance, yes, but the tears were real. The horror was real. Only the cause was a lie. They reached the apartment. Matthew was already inside. "She is not here," he shouted from the bedroom. "The bed is empty." Jerry rushed in, pushing past him. He went straight to the window. He grabbed the shutters, rattling them. "Look!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "They forced it. They forced the shutters." Kate stood in the doorway. She heard the soft breeze coming through and gently closed the door. "Don't touch anything," Russell warned from the hallway. "We need to call the police," but it was too late. The room was filling with people. Resort staff had arrived, alerted by the screaming. A waitress was standing in the living room, her hands over her mouth. A man from the reception was peering into the bathroom. "Check the roads," Jerry commanded, spinning around. He looked wild, his hair disheveled. "They cannot have gone far. Everyone, spread out. Check the beach. Check the streets." The command dispersed the group. The men ran out, shouting names, their voices fading into the night. The women stayed with Kate. Fiona wrapped her arms around her, rocking her back and forth. "Oh, Kate, I am so sorry." Fiona wept. "I am so sorry." Kate leaned into the embrace. She felt the warmth of her friend, the genuine compassion. It made her feel sick. She wanted to push Fiona away, to confess, to scream the truth. But the script was running. The die was cast. They took her. Kate sobbed into Fiona's shoulder. We were just here. We were just eating dinner. The police arrived 40 minutes later. To Kate, it felt like 40 years. The apartment had become a train station. People were coming in and out, offering water, offering comfort, searching cupboards that had already been searched. The scene was trampled. Any footprint in the dust, any fiber on the floor, was now lost under the tread of well-meaning tourists. Jerry sat on the sofa, his head in his hands. He was the picture of devastation, but every now and then, Kate saw him glance up. He was watching the door. He was watching the window. He was calculating the angles. When the two officers from the National Guard walked in, they looked young and overwhelmed. They did not seal the room. They did not separate the witnesses. They asked basic questions in broken English. "What time you last see her?" the officer asked, notebook in hand. 10 o'clock, Kate said. Her voice was steady now, flattened by shock. "I came to check. The door was open. The window was open. And before?" the officer asked. Jerry looked up. "I checked at 9:05. She was sleeping. Everything was fine. And you?" The officer pointed at Matthew, who was hovering by the door. 9:30, Matthew said. "I listened. It was quiet. The timeline was established. It was written in the notebook. It became official." Kate looked at the officer's pen moving across the paper. That ink was sealing their fate. It was turning a lie into a legal record. "We need dogs," Jerry said suddenly. "We need helicopters. You need to close the borders." "Why aren't you closing the borders?" He was aggressive, demanding. He was channeling his fear into anger. It was a brilliant deflection. By attacking the police for their incompetence, he positioned himself as the victim, the crusader. He forced them on the defensive. "We do what we can, sir," the officer said, looking flustered. "We call the detectives." The night wore on. The search expanded. Kate was moved to a neighbor's apartment. She sat on a strange sofa, holding a cup of tea she couldn't drink. She could hear the shouting outside. "Maddie! Maddie!" Every time she heard the name, it was a fresh stab wound. She knew they wouldn't find her. She knew the searchers were looking for a ghost. Jerry came in a while later. He sat beside her. He took her hand. His palm was sweaty. He squeezed her fingers. It was the same grip he had used at the table. A warning. A reminder. "We will find her," he said loud enough for the others to hear. "We will never stop looking." Kate looked at him. She saw the stranger behind his eyes. She realized then that she was not just grieving for her daughter. She was grieving for her husband. The man she had married was gone, replaced by this architect of deception. "I know," she whispered. She leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. The performance had only just begun. The first act was over, and the audience had bought it. But now they had to play this role for the rest of their lives. The curtain would never come. The arrival of the local police, the Garda Nacional Republicana, was not the sweeping cavalry charge that Kate had prayed for during the agonizing wait. It was a slow, confused trickle. Two officers stepped into the apartment, their presence feeling woefully inadequate against the magnitude of the hollow space where a child had been. They did not seal the door. They did not shout orders. They looked at the crying woman and the pacing man, and they looked at the open window. Jerry was on them immediately. He did not wait for introductions. He did not wait for them to assess the scene. He explained the sequence of events with desperate urgency, hammering the points home with the force of a desperate father. "She was taken," Jerry said, his voice raw but steady. "We checked. She was here. Then she was gone." The shutter was forced. "Look at the shutter." He pointed a shaking finger at the window in the children's bedroom. The officer, a man with tired eyes, moved toward it. He touched the latch. He ran his thumb along the metal. "Do not touch it," Jerry snapped, pulling his hand back. "Fingerprints. You need to get fingerprints." The officer looked at Jerry, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "We look, sir. We look." Kate watched from the doorway. She felt cold, a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She watched the officer inspect the shutters. She held her breath. She knew the shutters had not been forced. She knew because she had opened the window herself. Or had she? The memory was already blurring, rewritten by the story they had agreed upon. "No marks," the officer said, leaning closer to the metal. "No break." "They jemmied it," Kate said. Her voice sounded strange, detached. "I saw it. It was up." "It goes up easy," the officer said, demonstrating. He pushed the shutter up. It slid smoothly, no force. "It was forced," Jerry shouted. He moved into the officer's space, using his height, his authority. "Someone came in here. Someone watched us. They waited until we were at dinner, and they came in and took her. Why are you arguing about the window? Get the dogs. Close the roads." The confrontation set the tone for the hours that followed. The apartment, which should have been a sterile crime scene, became a thoroughfare. Neighbors came in to offer comfort. Staff members wandered through to check the other rooms. Every person who crossed the threshold erased a potential footprint, destroyed a microscopic fiber, confused the scent trail. Kate sat on the edge of her own bed, clutching the soft toy. She watched the destruction of evidence with a mixture of horror and dark, secret relief. If there was nothing to find, they would find nothing. But if there was something to find, a trace of the accident, a scent of death, the chaos was burying it. The lead investigator arrived later. He was different from the uniformed officers. He was sharper, quieter. He did not shout back at Jerry. He watched him. "Tell me the times," the investigator said, opening a notebook. "I checked at 9:05, Jerry said. She was asleep. The door was open a crack. I saw her. You saw her face? I saw her shape. She was sleeping. And the window? It was closed. I am sure it was closed. And you, madam?" "I came at 10, Kate said. The door was open wide. It slammed shut when I walked in. The draft. The window was open. The shutters were up." The investigator wrote this down. He tapped his pen against the paper. "So between 9:30 and 10, someone enters, forces a shutter that shows no damage, takes a child, and leaves without the other children waking up." "Yes," Jerry said. "That is what happened." "And the other man, Mr. Oldfield?" "He checked at 9:30. He listened." Jerry corrected quickly. "He did not go in. He listened at the door. He heard nothing." "So she could have been gone then?" "Maybe," Jerry said. "Or maybe she was being taken right then. Maybe he was in the room when Matt was at the door." The suggestion hung in the air, terrifying and plausible. It shifted the narrative from a silent disappearance to a near-miss encounter. It added a layer of danger that justified their panic. "We need to call the press," Jerry said abruptly, turning away from the investigator. He pulled his mobile phone from his pocket. "The police handle the press, sir," the investigator said. "We issue the statement." "No," Jerry said. "No. You are moving too slow. No one is doing anything. I am calling the news. I am calling Sky News. I am calling the BBC. We need everyone looking for her. Everyone." Kate looked up. "Jerry, we have to, Kate," he said, his eyes hard. "We have to make her the most famous child in the world. If they have her, they need to know we are not giving up. They need to know the world is watching." It was a brilliant strategy. Kate saw the logic immediately. If the world was looking for a kidnapped child, they would be looking for an abductor. They would be looking for a van, a stranger, a network. They would not be looking at the parents. The media glare would be a spotlight on the victim, but a blinding shield for them. Jerry began making calls. His voice changed as he spoke to the contacts back in England. He became the grieving, desperate father pleading for help. He was articulate, even in his distress. He gave them the photo, the one from the pool, the happy, smiling girl. "Please," he said into the phone. "Get it out. Get it everywhere." The investigator watched him. He closed his notebook. He looked at the window again. Then at the father, who was already managing a public relations campaign before the first forensics team had even dusted for fingerprints. "You are very organized, doctor," the investigator said softly. Jerry lowered the phone. "I am a doctor. I solve problems. My daughter is missing. I am trying to find her." "Of course," the investigator said. "But usually, parents, they cannot speak. They cannot think. We are not usual parents," Jerry said. The comment landed with a heavy thud. No, they were not usual. They were disciplined. They were trained to function under extreme pressure. They were trained to make life and death decisions and live with the consequences. The night dragged on. The forensic team finally arrived. They dusted the window. They dusted the door. They moved through the apartment with brushes and powders. Kate watched them work near the sofa. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The sofa. The place where Jerry had found her. Was there blood? Was there saliva? Had he cleaned it well enough in those frantic minutes? One of the forensic officers paused near the arm of the sofa. He shone his torch on the fabric. He leaned in close. Kate stopped breathing. She felt a scream building in her throat. The officer brushed a speck of lint away and moved on. She exhaled. The room spun. "We need to go," Jerry said, coming to her side. "They want us to leave so they can finish. We are staying with David and Fiona." "I cannot leave her," Kate whispered. "What if she comes back? What if she wakes up and comes back?" "She is not coming back, Kate," Jerry said, his voice low, for her ears only. "She was taken. Remember?" The cruelty of the reminder was necessary. It snapped her back to the script. She stood up, her legs numb. She walked out of apartment 5A. Outside, the air was cool. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first gray hints of dawn. The resort was quiet now, the initial panic settling into a grim, watchful silence. They walked to the Paynes' apartment. Their friends were waiting. They were embraced, held, comforted. "We will find her," Fiona said again. "We won't stop." Jerry nodded. He sat down at the table in the Paynes' living room. He put his phone on the table. He looked at Kate. "The story is out," he said. "The morning news. It will be everywhere." Kate looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the lines of strain, but she also saw the iron resolve. He had built a fortress of noise and light around their secret. He had invited the entire world to watch the magic trick, knowing that if everyone was watching the right hand, no one would notice what the left hand had done. "The window," Kate said softly. "Are you sure?" "The window was forced," Jerry said, closing his eyes. "That is the truth. That is the only truth." Kate looked out at the sunrise. The light was touching the white walls of the resort, painting them pink and gold. It was a beautiful morning, the kind of morning that promised heat and joy. The sun had barely risen when the siege began. It started not with soldiers or weaponry, but with a different kind of artillery. The heavy, black lenses of television cameras and the telescopic snouts of paparazzi photography equipment. The quiet perimeter of the Ocean Club, usually disturbed only by the sound of poolside chatter, was transformed into a chaotic amphitheater of global curiosity. Jerry stood by the window of the Paynes' apartment, peering through the gap in the curtains. He watched the vans arrive, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky like white shields. He saw the cables snaking across the pavement, the reporters adjusting their earpieces, the sheer, overwhelming mass of the media machine he had summoned. "It is working," he said, his voice tight with a strange mixture of validation and dread. "They are here. Everyone is here." Kate sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. She felt numb, her skin vibrating with a low-frequency hum of shock that had not dissipated since the night before. She looked at her husband. He was no longer just a cardiologist. He was a general commanding an army he could barely control. He had shaved, dressed in a crisp shirt, and combed his hair. He looked like a man ready to do business with the devil if it meant surviving the day. "They want a statement," Jerry said, turning from the window. "The police liaison says we need to speak to them. We need to feed the beast, Kate. If we do not give them a story, they will invent one. And we cannot afford for them to invent one." Kate nodded slowly. She understood the strategy. Control the narrative. Keep the focus on the abductor. Keep the face of their daughter on every screen, in every newspaper, in every living room from London to Lisbon. If the world was looking for a missing child, they would not be looking at the timeline discrepancies. They would not be asking why the window shutters showed no sign of force. But the thought of stepping out there, of standing in front of those cameras and performing this grief, made her bile rise. It was not that her grief was fake. It was a crushing, suffocating weight, but the context was a lie. She had to beg for the return of a child she knew could not be returned. She had to play the victim of a crime that had not happened in the way she was describing. "We need to agree on the words," Jerry said, sitting down opposite her. He pulled a notepad toward him. "Simple phrases. Please bring her back. We are devastated. She is just a little girl. We appeal to the kidnapper's humanity. That is the angle." Kate watched his pen move across the paper. He was scripting their agony. "And the others?" she asked. "The 7? They know the drill," Jerry said, his pen not stopping. "They are being interviewed by the police again today. They stick to the times. Matthew checked at 9:30. Silence. I checked at 9:05. Sleeping. You checked at 10. Gone. That is the holy trinity of our defense. As long as they hold the line, the window of opportunity for an abductor is established." "But why would they lie for us?" Kate whispered. The question that had plagued her all night. "They are jeopardizing their own careers. If they find out, perhaps they are holding the line to protect the group's reputation, unaware of the darker truth hidden within. Social services, medical boards, the public shame. They are protecting the group. Kate, loyalty can be a blinding force." The logic was brutal, but sound. Mutual destruction was a powerful adhesive. An hour later, they walked out to face the storm. The wall of sound hit them first. The clicking of hundreds of camera shutters firing in unison, a sound like a swarm of mechanical locusts. Then the shouting. "Kate! Jerry! Over here! Just one look! How are you feeling?" They stood on the steps of the resort, holding hands. Kate clutched the pink soft toy, the cuddle cat. It was a prop, she knew, but it was also her only anchor in the gale. She squeezed it until her knuckles turned white. Jerry stepped up to the cluster of microphones. He cleared his throat. He looked straight into the lens of the nearest camera, his expression a perfect balance of stoicism and heartbreak. "We plead with the person who has taken our daughter," Jerry began, his voice steady. "Please, she is just a child. She needs her family. We will not press charges. We just want her back. Please, do the right thing." Kate stood beside him, her head bowed. She let the tears fall. They were easy to summon. She cried for the loss. She cried for the fear. She cried for the lie that was now being broadcast via satellite to millions of viewers. She felt the gaze of the world settling on her. They were analyzing her face, her posture, her grip on the toy. She knew that some would see a broken mother, but she also knew that others, the cynical ones, the detectives watching from their offices, might see something else. They might see the guilt. Do not look at the cameras, she told herself. Look at the ground. Look at the toy. Be the victim. When Jerry finished, he put his arm around her, and they turned to leave. The questions shouted after them were aggressive, probing. Did you leave the door unlocked? Why were they alone? Do you have any suspects? Jerry ignored them, guiding her back into the safety of the building. As the door closed, cutting off the noise, he let out a long breath. Good, he said. That was good. That will be on the evening news. The rest of the day was a blur of police interviews and strategy sessions. The British consul arrived, offering support. The police liaison officer tried to be helpful but seemed overwhelmed by the media circus Jerry had orchestrated. But beneath the surface, a friction was developing. The Portuguese detectives were not charmed by the cameras. They were annoyed. They felt the pressure of the foreign press dictating their investigation. In the afternoon, the lead inspector, a man named Goncalo, sat them down in a stark interview room. He did not offer tea. He did not offer sympathy. He placed a photo on the table. It was a picture of the window shutters. You say these were forced, Goncalo said, his English heavily accented but precise. Yes, Jerry said. We found no tool marks, Goncalo said. No scratches, no metal fatigue. The mechanism is intact. It can only be opened from the inside or with the key from the outside. Maybe they used a cloth, Jerry suggested, to muffle the sound, to protect the metal. Goncalo looked at him. A cloth does not stop metal from bending, Doctor. And the fingerprint dust. It shows nothing on the outside, but on the inside. He let the sentence hang. On the inside? Kate asked, her voice trembling. Kate's prints, Goncalo said. On the window, on the shutter strap. I opened it, Kate said quickly. When I found her gone. I told you. The wind slammed the door. I went to the window to close it, to check. I must have touched it then. Goncalo nodded slowly, but his eyes remained skeptical. Of course. Panic. You touch things. But it is strange, no? An abductor who flies through a window without touching it, takes a child, and leaves without waking the twins in the same room? He is a professional, Jerry said, leaning forward. A criminal. He has been watching us. He knew the routine. The detective leaned back. A professional who targets a ground-floor apartment with 3 adults dining 30 yards away? It is a high risk, Doctor. Very high risk. He left the room without saying more, leaving the doubt to fester in the silence. That night, back in the temporary accommodation, the reality of what they had created began to sink in. They were not just fighting a local police force anymore. They were fighting perception. Jerry turned on the television. The news was on. Their faces filled the screen. The headline read, "The Face of Innocence. World Hunts for Maddie." They showed the police sketch of the suspect, a vague, faceless man seen by Jane Tanner carrying a child. It was a ghost. A phantom, constructed from shadows and panic. Look at that, Jerry said, pointing at the screen. That is our shield. The investigation had stagnated. The summer heat had baked the initial fervor into a hard, brittle crust of frustration. The posters were fading on the telephone poles, the corners curling in the sun. The media caravan had thinned, moving on to fresher tragedies, leaving only the die-hard correspondents to pick over the dry bones of the case. But in the cool, sterile offices of the police headquarters, a new strategy was being formed. The Portuguese detectives, weary of the criticism and the dead ends, had requested specialist support from the United Kingdom. They did not ask for more officers to knock on doors. They asked for technology. They asked for biology. They asked for the nose of a creature that could not be bribed, charmed, or manipulated by a press release. Martin Grime arrived with 2 English Springer Spaniels. They were small, energetic dogs, their tails wagging with a deceptive playfulness. One was trained to detect human blood. The other, a victim recovery dog, was trained to detect the specific chemical signature of human biological breakdown, the scent of death. Jerry watched them from the balcony of the new villa they were renting. He held a pair of binoculars, his knuckles white. "They are bringing dogs," he said, his voice flat. "Not tracking dogs. Cadaver dogs." Kate looked up from her book. She had not turned a page in an hour. "Why?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Why? Now?" "Because they have run out of leads," Jerry said, lowering the binoculars. "And because they suspect. They have always suspected." The search of apartment 5A was scheduled for the following morning. The apartment had been released back to the resort weeks ago, cleaned and rented out to unsuspecting tourists. But the scent of death, the handler explained to the detectives, is oily and persistent. It seeps into grout, into fabric, into the very pores of the concrete. It can be scrubbed, but to a trained nose, it is as loud as a siren. The video camera was rolling as the handler led the first dog, Eddie, into the apartment. The room was empty of furniture now, a hollow echo of the space where the family had stayed. The dog moved with a frantic, joyous intensity, his nose skimming the floor tiles. He worked the perimeter. The kitchen. The bathroom. The parents' bedroom. Nothing. Then he moved into the living area. He circled the space where the sofa had been. He stopped. His body language changed instantly. The tail stopped wagging. He became rigid, focused. He barked, a sharp, clear alert. The handler tossed him a tennis ball as a reward. "Good boy," he said softly. The detective watching from the doorway felt a chill run down his spine. The dog had alerted exactly where the father had claimed to be checking on his children. Next, the dog was taken to the children's bedroom. He sniffed the floor. He sniffed the wardrobe. He stopped at the wardrobe. He barked again. The handler made a note. 2 alerts. 1 behind the sofa. 1 in the wardrobe. They brought in the second dog, Keela. She was trained to find blood, even microscopic specks that had been bleached and scrubbed. She moved through the same spaces. She ignored the wardrobe, but behind the sofa area, she froze. She placed her nose against a specific tile and lay down. It was a passive alert. She had found something. The tiles were lifted. Underneath, in the grout, was a microscopic trace of fluid. It was too degraded for a full profile, but it was there. The implications were catastrophic. Later that day, the police requested the family's clothing and the child's favorite toy for screening. Kate handed over the cuddle cat with a reluctance that bordered on physical pain. It was her talisman. To give it to the police felt like a betrayal. They lined up the items in a sterile gymnasium clothes from various people, decoy items, and the specific articles belonging to the family. They brought the dog in again. The dog ran down the line. He ignored the decoys. He ignored the clothes of the other tourists. He stopped at a pair of floral trousers belonging to Kate. He barked. He stopped at the cuddle cat. He grabbed it in his mouth, tossing it into the air, barking excitedly. To the dog, it was a game. To the detectives, it was a revelation. The scent of a dead body was on the mother's clothes. It was on the child's toy. When the news reached Jerry and Kate, the reaction was not the confusion of the innocent, but the calculated defense of the guilty. They were sitting in their lawyer's office, the air conditioning humming loudly in the silence. "It is impossible," Jerry said, leaning forward, his face flushed with anger. "The dogs are wrong. They are unreliable. We have been touching dead bodies in the hospital. We are doctors. That is, transfer." The lawyer looked at him skeptically. "You carry the scent of corpses on your holiday clothes, doctor. On your swimming trunks, and on the child's toy? Do you take the toy to the morgue?" "It is contamination," Jerry shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "They are planting evidence. They are desperate to pin this on us because they cannot find the abductor. Kate sat silently. She felt a wave of nausea. The dogs. They couldn't explain away the dogs. You could spin a story to a journalist. You could cry for a camera, but you could not lie to a creature that smelled the chemical truth of what had happened. The dog smelled her, Kate thought. The dog smelled something on my clothes. Not the living daughter. Something she dared not name. The police called them in for a second interview. The tone had changed completely. There was no more tea. There was no more sympathy. The investigators looked at them with cold, hard eyes. "Can you explain?" "Mrs. McCann," the detective asked, placing a still image from the video on the table, "why the specialist dog alerted to the toy you have been carrying everywhere?" Kate looked at the photo. The dog looked happy. It was playing with the cat. "I cannot explain it," she said, her voice trembling. "I picked it up. I have held it every day." "Were you in contact with her after the event?" the detective asked. The question was a hammer blow. It was sudden, brutal, and direct. "No," Kate gasped. "I told you. She was taken. And the wardrobe?" The detective slid another photo across. "The dog alerted here." "Did you hide her there?" Jerry intervened. "This is ridiculous. You are relying on a dog that barks for a tennis ball. Where is the DNA? Where is the fingerprint? You have nothing." "We have the scent," the detective said calmly. "And we have the blood dog. Behind the sofa." "It was a nosebleed," Jerry said quickly. "She had nosebleeds, or it was from a previous tenant. You cannot prove that is her blood." "We are testing it," the detective said. "The lab in Birmingham is testing it. If it matches." He let the threat hang in the air. That night, the atmosphere in the villa was toxic. The unity of the couple was fraying under the pressure of the invisible evidence. Jerry paced the living room, pouring whiskey into a tumbler. "They are bluffing," he said. "They don't have enough DNA. It's too small. It's too degraded." "How do you know?" Kate asked, looking up from the floor. "How can you be sure?" "I made sure the car was spotless," he whispered intensely. He stopped, realizing what he had said. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. He sat down next to her. "Listen to me. The dogs are not evidence in court. Not on their own. They need corroboration. They need a body, and they will never find a body." Kate looked at him. His confidence was terrifying. It was the confidence of a man who had been thorough. "But the car," Kate whispered. "What about the car?" Jerry froze. "The rental car. The Renault Scenic they had hired weeks after the disappearance. The car they had used to move the items, to move the package." "I cleaned the car," Jerry said. "I tried to clean everything, to remove every trace of that night." "The dogs are checking the car tomorrow," Kate said. Jerry stared at her. The whiskey glass shook in his hand. "If the dog alerts on the car," he said slowly, "then we have a problem, because we didn't rent the car until 24 days after she went missing. An abductor didn't use our car. We did." The logic was inescapable. If the scent of death was in a vehicle rented weeks later, it could only mean one thing. The body had been moved. It meant the parents were not just victims of a crime, but active participants in a cover-up that was still ongoing. "We need to leave," Kate said. "We need to go back to England." "We can't," Jerry said. "We are suspects now. If we run, we look guilty. We have to stay. We have to fight the dogs. We have to discredit the dogs." "How?" "We hire experts. We go on TV. We say the dogs are unreliable. We say the police are incompetent. We make so much noise that the bark of the dog is drowned out." He stood up, his resolve hardening again. It was a war now. Science against spin, truth against survival. "Get the press officer on the phone," Jerry said. "We need to issue a statement about the dogs. We need to say we are shocked and hurt by these allegations." Kate watched him dial the number. She touched the empty space on the sofa beside her, where the cuddle cat used to sit. The police had kept it. It was evidence now. She closed her eyes and imagined the smell that the dog had found. The sweet, sickly smell of the end. She couldn't smell it. She had lived with it, breathed it, worn it, and she had never smelled it. But the dog knew. And now, the world was beginning to sniff the air, and the wind was changing direction. The silver Renault Scenic sat in the police impound lot, separated from the other vehicles by a cordon of yellow tape. It was an unremarkable car, the kind used by thousands of families on holiday to transport beach towels, groceries, and tired children. But to the detectives standing in the observation room, and to the parents waiting in the interrogation suite, that car was the centerpiece of the entire investigation. It was the metal box that held the potential to turn a missing person case into a murder trial. Jerry sat in the waiting room, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together so tightly that the skin over his knuckles was white. He was replaying the timeline in his head, searching for the error, the slip, the loose thread that could unravel the tapestry of lies they had woven. They had rented the car 24 days after the disappearance. That was the fact that confused the public but terrified the police. Why would an abductor use a car rented by the parents 3 weeks later? The answer was logical only if the parents were the ones moving the evidence. Kate sat beside him. She was staring at the wall, but her mind was back in the driver's seat of that car, reliving a night she had tried to scrub from her memory. It had been a decision born of necessity. The initial hiding place, a patch of rough ground near the roadworks, was becoming dangerous. The police were expanding their search zones. The land was scheduled to be cleared for construction. They could not leave her there. The risk of discovery was rising with every passing hour. "We have to move her," Jerry had said one evening, his voice barely a whisper in the safety of their villa. "We have to move her to somewhere permanent, somewhere they will never look." The memory of that night washed over Kate like a wave of ice water. She remembered the smell. It was not the smell of the ocean or the pine trees. It was a sweet, cloying, unmistakable odor that clung to the upholstery of the car even after they had scrubbed it. She remembered the drive. It was the middle of the night. The roads were empty, illuminated only by the headlights of the Renault. Every shadow looked like a police officer. Every set of headlights in the rearview mirror looked like a patrol car Jerry had driven. She had sat in the passenger seat, rigid with terror. In the boot of the car, inside a large sports bag, was the reality of their situation. It was no longer a daughter. It was evidence. It was a package that carried a life sentence. They had driven for miles, looking for a spot that was remote, untouched. They had stopped by a roadside verge, overgrown and dark. Jerry had taken the bag. He had disappeared into the darkness for 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes were the longest of Kate's life. She had sat in the car, the engine idling, waiting for the siren, waiting for the shout, waiting for the end. When he returned, he was empty-handed. He got in the car. He did not speak. He drove them back to the villa. They cleaned the car the next morning. They threw away the liner of the boot. They aired it out. They sprayed air freshener. They thought they were safe. But they had forgotten about the biology. They had forgotten that fluids seep. They had forgotten that cells shed. And they had forgotten that a dog's nose can smell a single molecule of death amidst a million molecules of bleach. Back in the present, the door to the interrogation room opened. The lead detective, Goncalo, walked in. He did not look tired anymore. He looked energized. He held a file in his hand. "We have the report from the laboratory in Birmingham," Goncalo said, sitting down opposite them. He placed the file on the table but did not open it immediately. Jerry straightened up, and the detective looked at them. His gaze was heavy, weighing their souls. The dog alerted to the key fob of your car, doctor. And the dog alerted to the boot of the car. The victim recovery dog. The blood dog. Jerry scoffed. A noise of dismissive arrogance. We have been over this. The dogs are not evidence. No, Goncalo agreed. Dogs are not evidence. But DNA is evidence. Kate felt her heart stop. She stopped breathing. She felt the blood drain from her face. We found DNA in the boot, Goncalo said, beneath the carpet, in the wheel well. It is a match to your daughter. Jerry didn't blink. A match? A full match? Goncalo hesitated. It was a subtle pause, but Jerry, with his scientific mind, caught it instantly. It is a complex sample, Goncalo admitted. It is what we call low copy number DNA. We have 15 markers out of 19. Jerry exhaled. A smile, cold and criminally, touched his lips. 15 markers. So it is not 100% match. It could be a sibling. It could be a mixture. It is a 1 in a billion probability that it is not her, Goncalo said, his voice rising. But it is not conclusive, Jerry countered. And there is a perfectly innocent explanation. Goncalo leaned forward. Please, doctor, enlighten me. How does your daughter's DNA, derived from bodily fluids related to biological breakdown, get into the boot of a car you rented 3 weeks after she vanished? Did the abductor borrow your car keys? Jerry did not flinch. We transported items. Her clothes, her sandals, her dirty nappies from the twins. DNA transfers. You know this. And the fluids? The smell? And the dog alerted to a specific scent, doctor. One that tells a tragic story. Not one of dirty laundry. Meat, Jerry said. The word was dropped into the silence like a stone. Excuse me. Goncalo looked confused. We bought meat, Jerry explained, his voice gaining confidence. Fresh beef, pork, for a barbecue. We put it in the boot. It was hot. The bag leaked. The blood dripped into the carpet. That is what the dog smelled. Rotting meat. Kate stared at her husband. It was an absurd lie. It was desperate. But it was also brilliant in its simplicity. Organic matter is organic matter. Organic biological breakdown has a distinct scent because of its nature. If they could create enough doubt, if they could confuse a jury, it might be enough. The detective looked at Jerry with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. You are telling me that the English specialist dog, who has found bodies in concrete, in water, in forests, confused your daughter with a bag of pork chops? I am telling you that dogs make mistakes, Jerry said. And I am telling you that 15 markers is not 19 markers. You do not have a case. You do not have a case. Goncalo stood up. He slammed the file shut. The noise echoed in the small room. We have enough to make you arguido, he said. We have enough to name you as formal suspects. You will answer questions. And if you lie, you will go to prison. We are not lying, Kate said softly. Her voice was weak, trembling under the weight of the fiction. We are victims. Goncalo looked at her. He saw the cracks in her armor. He saw the fear that Jerry was managing to hide. The car tells the story, Mrs. McCann, Goncalo said. The car knows where she is, and one day you will get tired of the suspicion. One day, the weight of that car will crush you. He walked out, leaving them alone in the room. Jerry turned to Kate. He grabbed her hand. His grip was painful. Listen to me, he hissed. The DNA is not a full match. That is our lifeline. We attack the science. We say the sample was contaminated. We say the lab made a mistake. But the meat, Jerry? Kate whispered. The meat story? It sounds ridiculous. It is better than the truth, Jerry snapped. Anything is better than the truth. He stood up and began to pace the small room. He was already drafting the press release in his head. He would blame the Portuguese police. He would say they were framing the parents to cover up their own incompetence. He would appeal to the British government. Kate closed her eyes. She could still smell the car. She could smell the fear of that night drive. She realized then that they would never be free of that vehicle, even if the police released it. Even if it was crushed into a cube of scrap metal, that silver Renault would drive through her nightmares forever. It was the hearse that nobody saw. The getaway car that went nowhere. And now, it was the cage that locked them into their deception for the rest of their lives. The atmosphere in the police station had shifted from investigative curiosity to adversarial combat. The polite veneer of the early days, where tea was offered and sympathies were exchanged, had entirely evaporated. The air was now thick, with the sterile, metallic taste of legal jeopardy. Kate sat in the interview chair. She was alone. Jerry was in a separate room down the hall. This was a deliberate tactic by the police. Divide and conquer. Isolate the subjects, apply pressure, and wait for the discrepancies to appear in their stories. The man sitting across from her was not Goncalo, but a senior interrogator. He did not look at her with pity. He looked at her as if she were a puzzle he was about to solve by force. He placed a document on the table. "Sign this," he said. Kate looked at the paper. It was in Portuguese, but the translation was provided below. It was a notification of status. Arguido, suspect. "What does this mean?" Kate asked, her voice trembling. "It means you are no longer a witness," the interrogator said. "It means you have the right to remain silent. It means you have the right to a lawyer. But it also means we believe you were involved in the death and concealment of your daughter." "I wasn't," Kate said automatically. It was the reflex they had practiced 1,000 times. The interrogator ignored her denial. He opened a thick file. He placed a photo of the cuddle cat on the table. Then a photo of the car. Then a photo of the window. "We are going to go through the night of May 3rd, he said, again. "And this time, I want the truth." He began to ask questions. They were not the gentle, open-ended questions of the past. They were sharp, specific, and trapped. Why did you wash the cuddle cat after she disappeared? Why did the cadaver dog alert to your trousers? Why did you refuse to give up your medical records? Why did you change your timeline about the window? Kate felt the walls closing in. Every answer she gave felt like she was stepping onto a landmine. If she said too much, she might reveal a detail that contradicted Jerry. If she said too little, she looked uncooperative. She remembered Jerry's advice before they were separated. If it gets too hard, say nothing. Silence cannot be used against you in the same way a lie can. The interrogator leaned forward. "Mrs. McCann, we have a theory about an accident. We suspect a fall occurred and panic set in. We can help you. If you tell us where the body is, we can treat this as accidental manslaughter, a tragedy. But if you continue to lie, this is murder. Do you understand? Murder." The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Kate looked at the table. She thought of the wardrobe. She thought of the roadworks. She thought of the long drive in the Renault. She thought of the pact she had made with her husband. She looked up at the interrogator. Her face became a mask of stone. "No comment," she said. The interrogator blinked. "Excuse me?" "No comment," Kate repeated. He asked another question. "About the blood behind the sofa." "No comment." He asked about the medication rumors regarding the children. "No comment." For hours, the interrogation continued. The police threw everything they had at her. They showed her pictures of landfills. They showed her pictures of prisons. They shouted. They pleaded. They tried to trick her. But Kate McCann had retreated into a fortress of silence. She answered 48 questions with those 2 words. No comment. It was the only shield she had left. To speak was to risk everything. To speak was to invite the slip of the tongue that would destroy her family. Down the hall, Jerry was employing a different strategy. He was arguing. He was debating the science. He was challenging the validity of the low copy number DNA. He was fighting the experts on their own ground. "You cannot prove it," he shouted at his interrogator. "It is a statistical probability, not a fact. You are trying to frame us because you failed to catch the real criminal." The police were frustrated. They had the scent. They had the partial DNA. They had the inconsistencies. But they did not have the body. And without the body, without the physical proof of cause of death, they were fighting a ghost. The law in Portugal was strict. They could not hold suspects indefinitely without charge. And to charge them with homicide, they needed more than a dog's bark and a partial DNA match. They needed a confession, and the parents were not confessing. Late that night, the decision was made. The police did not have enough to arrest them and throw away the key. The evidence was circumstantial. It was strong, but it was not absolute. They were released. Walking out of the police station in the early hours of the morning was a surreal experience. The crowd of reporters outside was larger than ever. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. The questions were shouted like accusations. "Did you kill her? Why are you suspects? Where is the body?" Jerry held Kate's arm. He marched her through the gauntlet. He looked angry. He looked defiant. "We are innocent," he shouted to the cameras. "This is a disgrace. We are being persecuted." Kate kept her head down. She felt the eyes of the world burning into her skin. They were arguidos. The label was branded on them now. It would never wash off. Even if the case was closed, even if they were cleared, the doubt would remain. They got into their car, not the Renault, but a taxi. As they drove away, leaving the chaos of the police station behind, Kate looked out of the window at the dark streets of Praia da Luz. They had survived the interrogation. They had survived the dogs. The label of Arguido was heavy. A legal branding that transformed Kate and Jerry from grieving parents into official suspects. The police station in Portimao became their second home, a place of fluorescent lights and endless, circular questions. The sympathy of the world, once a warm blanket, had begun to fray. The questions from the press were sharper now, laced with the suspicion that the Portuguese police had formally declared. Inside the interrogation room, the air was stale. Kate sat opposite the senior investigator. He was not the man who had initially taken their statement. This man was colder, his eyes devoid of pity. He placed a series of photographs on the table. They were not of a smiling child. They were of forensic markers. "You refused to answer 48 questions yesterday, Mrs. McCann," the investigator said, his voice level. "Do you think silence helps your daughter?" "I think the truth helps her," Kate replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And the truth is that she was taken." The investigator leaned forward. "We have the dogs. We have the DNA in the car. We have the inconsistencies in the timeline. We know about the accident, Kate. We know you panicked. If you tell us now, we can help. We can treat this as a tragedy, not a crime. But you must tell us where she is." The offer hung in the air. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, but to grab it was to admit guilt. To grab it was to destroy the carefully constructed reality they had lived in for months. Kate looked at the table. She thought of the pact. She thought of the twins waiting back at the villa. "No comment," she said. The investigator sighed, a sound of genuine frustration. "You are protecting a lie," he said. "And lies have a way of rotting from the inside." Down the hall, Jerry was fighting a different battle. He was attacking the science. He argued about transfer rates, about the unreliability of low copy number DNA, about the contamination of the crime scene. He was brilliant, aggressive, and desperate. He knew that if he could create enough doubt about the forensic evidence, the case would never stand up in court. "They cannot prove it," he told himself. They have a smell and a shadow. That is not enough for a conviction. When they were finally released, the walk to the waiting vehicle was a gauntlet. The cameras flashed like lightning, blinding and relentless. The questions shouted from the darkness were accusations. Did you kill her? Where is the body? Why won't you answer? They drove back to the villa in silence. The arguido status meant they were trapped in a legal limbo. They were free to move, but they were tethered to the investigation. They were suspects in the disappearance of their own child. We have to go home, Jerry said that night, pacing the living room. We cannot stay here. They are trying to frame us. We need to be in England. We need our own lawyers. We need our own experts. But if we leave, we look like fugitives, Kate whispered. If we stay, they will arrest us, Jerry countered. They are desperate. They need a solution. We are the solution. The decision was made. They would return to the United Kingdom. It was a retreat, a tactical withdrawal from a battlefield they could no longer control. As they packed their bags, Kate felt a crushing weight in her chest. Leaving Portugal felt like leaving her daughter behind. But the rational part of her mind, the part that had engaged the moment she screamed they have taken her, knew that the daughter was not in Portugal. The daughter was gone. Only the ghost remained. The return to Rothley was not a return to normalcy. The quiet village had been transformed into a media encampment. Satellite trucks parked on the verges, reporters camped on the doorsteps. The sanctuary of home was violated by the same lens that had followed them in the Algarve. But from the safety of British soil, the dynamic shifted. The Portuguese investigation began to crumble under the weight of political pressure and lack of hard evidence. The lead detective, Goncalo Amaral, who had been convinced of the parents' guilt, was removed from the case. His theories, once the driving force of the inquiry, were now treated as an embarrassment. Jerry watched the news reports with grim satisfaction. The removal of Amaral was a victory. It was the first crack in the prosecution's wall. He was too emotional, Jerry said, pointing at the screen. He made it personal. Now we can get back to the real investigation, finding the abductor. But the real investigation was stalling. The Portuguese police, demoralized and leaderless, archived the case. The status of Arguido was lifted. Technically, Kate and Jerry were no longer suspects. They were innocent in the eyes of the law. Yet, the court of public opinion was not so easily swayed. The internet had become a battleground. Forums dissected every interview, every facial expression, every discrepancy. The Tapas 7 stayed silent, honoring the pact, but the rumors swirled around them like a toxic fog. The family tried to rebuild. Jerry went back to work. He put on his suit, went to the hospital, and saved lives. He compartmentalized the trauma with surgical precision. Kate found it harder. She could not simply switch off the mother who had lost a child, nor the woman who was living a lie. She threw herself into the campaign. The Find Madeleine Fund became her job. She wrote a book. She gave interviews. Every interview was a high-wire act. She had to appear devastated but hopeful. She had to answer questions about the night without revealing the truth. She had to talk about the window, the shutters, the timeline, over and over again, until the lie became a memory, solid and immovable. The friction in the marriage was palpable. They were bound together by the secret, two prisoners chained to the same iron ball. They could not separate. To separate would be to risk one of them breaking. To divorce would be to open the door for a confession. They were trapped in a union of survival. "Do you think they will ever stop looking?" Kate asked one evening, watching the rain streak the windows of their living room. "No," Jerry said. "And we must never stop asking them to look, as long as they are looking for him. The stranger. They are not looking at us." It was a cynical truth, but it was the foundation of their freedom. The abductor was their greatest creation. He was the invisible man who had walked through walls, left no DNA, and vanished into thin air. He was the perfect villain, and as long as he existed in the public imagination, Kate and Jerry were the perfect victims. Years turned into a decade. The twins grew from toddlers into teenagers. They walked to school past the posters of their missing sister, images frozen in time. The age progression photos released by the police were grotesque reminders of what had been lost. A computer-generated ghost, aging in a digital void. The house in Rothley was a museum of absence. Maddie's room was kept exactly as it had been. It was a shrine, a place where Kate would sit for hours, talking to the silence. The psychological toll was immense. Kate suffered from nightmares. She saw the apartment. She saw the wardrobe. She saw the roadworks. She woke up screaming, reaching for a child who was not there. Jerry dealt with it differently. He became obsessed with the legal battles. He sued newspapers for libel. He fought the ex-detective Amaral in the courts, trying to silence his book, trying to ban the theory of the accident. It was a way of channeling his guilt into aggression. If he could win in court, he could prove to himself that he was right, but the doubt never truly left. There were moments, late at night, when the facade slipped. "We should have called the police," Kate whispered once, in the dark, to that first moment. "We should have just called them." Jerry stiffened beside her. "It was an accident, Kate. Negligence. We would have lost everything. The twins. Our careers. We would be in prison. Is that what you wanted?" "I want peace," she said. "There is no peace," Jerry replied. "There is only survival." The investigation, known as Operation Grange, continued to burn through millions of pounds of taxpayer money. The British police, determined to solve the case, chased leads across the globe. They dug up scrubland in Portugal. They interviewed convicted offenders in prisons. They followed tips from psychics and con artists. Every time a new search was announced, the media circus returned, and every time Kate and Jerry had to stand on the steps and look hopeful. They had to pray that the police would find nothing, while publicly praying they would find something. It was a torture of cognitive dissonance. If they find something, Kate thought, watching the news of a new dig site, it will be over. If they find a bone. If they find a scrap of fabric. But they never found anything. The secret remained buried, protected by time and the vastness of the landscape. The earth kept its counsel. Then, out of the blue, a breakthrough. Or so it seemed. German authorities announced they had a suspect. A man named Christian B. A drifter. A man with a serious criminal history. A man who had been in the area at the time. The world exploded with the news. Finally, the monster had a face. Kate and Jerry watched the announcement on television. They saw the photo of the man. He looked the part. Rough, criminal, dangerous. "Is it him?" Kate asked, a strange hope fluttering in her chest. Could it be him? Jerry looked at the screen, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter if it is him, Kate. It matters that they think it is him." The German prosecutor was confident. He claimed to have concrete evidence that Madeleine was dead. He claimed he knew how she died. But he did not have the body. For the parents, this was the ultimate paradox. The authorities were finally saying what Jerry and Kate knew, that she was dead, but they were blaming a stranger. It was the perfect scapegoat. Christian B. was a villain, straight from central casting. He had no alibi. He had a history. He was the container into which the world could pour all its hate and suspicion. But as the months dragged on, the charges did not materialize. The concrete evidence seemed to be circumstantial. Phone, masked data. A conversation in a bar. It was smoke and mirrors, just like the case against the parents had been. Kate found herself wrestling with a new kind of guilt. Was she praying for an innocent man, innocent of this specific crime, to be charged? Was she willing to let another human being spend his life in prison to protect their secret? Yes, a voice inside her whispered. Yes, if it saves the twins. Yes, if it ends the waiting, the narrative shifted again. The parents were no longer the prime suspects in the eyes of the public. They were the tragic couple waiting for justice against a German criminal. The heat was off. The spotlight had moved. Jerry relaxed for the first time in years. He gave interviews that were more confident. He spoke about closure. He spoke about justice. He knows he didn't do it, Kate thought, looking at her husband. But he will watch him burn to save us. It was the final corruption of their souls. To accept the condemnation of a stranger, to wash away their own sins. The case of Madeleine McCann had become a part of the cultural fabric, a modern myth of lost innocence. But for the two people at the center of the storm, it was a quiet, daily endurance. The house was quiet now. The twins were preparing for university, ready to leave the nest. Kate and Jerry would soon be alone in the house, with the ghost. They sat in the garden on the anniversary. May 3rd. It was always a hard day. The media would return, briefly, to mark the date. "Do you remember her voice?" Kate asked. Jerry nodded. "I remember her laugh." He reached out and took her hand. His skin was paper thin, aged by stress and time. They looked at each other. Two veterans of a war. Nobody else knew they were fighting. The truth was not in a police file. It was not in a German prison. It was not in a scrubland in Praia de Luz. It was right there, in the space between their hands. The pact held. It had held through interrogations, through media storms, through the terrifying alerts of cadaver dogs. It had held because it had to. They had maintained the perfect silence, not because they were masterminds, but because the world refused to believe that two doctors, two respectable, middle-class parents, could be capable of such a thing. The class system had been their greatest accomplice. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden. "We made it," Jerry said softly. Kate looked at him. She looked at the empty chair at the garden table. "Did we?" she asked. She thought of the little girl with the blue-green eyes. She thought of the cold panic of that night. She thought of the silence of the wardrobe. She realized then that they hadn't made it. They hadn't escaped. They had simply moved the prison from a Portuguese police station to their own minds. They would never be free. Every knock at the door, every phone call, every look from a stranger would be a reminder. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann would remain unsolved. The files would gather dust. The detectives would retire. The world would move on. But in the quiet house in Rothley, the clock would always be stuck at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. The window would always be open, and the question would always hang in the air, unanswered and unanswerable to anyone but them. What really happened? Kate squeezed her husband's hand and looked into the gathering dark. "No comment," she whispered to the night. "No comment."